Hello and welcome. The following is a conversation with Magnus Boman, professor in AI in Health at the Department of Medicine, Division of Clinical Epidemiology at the Karolinska Institute. He's the lead of AI at Karolinska, and his research spans a variety of different use cases and applications of AI in health and medicine. Sadly, due to a technical difficulty, we couldn't use the footage from Magnus's camera. But as a majority of followers of this podcast listen to it rather than watching the videos, we've decided to nonetheless upload the YouTube video with footage from one camera and pictures from Magnus's side, so as to provide a means of listening to the podcast on YouTube nonetheless. It was a true honor to have this conversation with Magnus, and I hope that you enjoyed the program. Could you give an introduction to your work with multimodal prediction and prevention in health systems?
Yeah.
Well, let's also have a clarification of what we mean with multimodal.
Yeah, multimodal just means that there are multiple modalities. And a modality most people think of as text or image or sound. But when it comes to the human body, a biomarker of some kind is also a modality. And if we think about image modalities, there are loads of ways that you can scan a human being, and this produces very different images. So it is often convenient and customary, I would say, these days, sort of standard to think of different imaging techniques as different modalities. So multimodal means usually that you take into account the signal from many modalities to fuse them or to blend them or to select among them one strong signal, and that's your basically output signal. So for a prediction, that means for instance, how confident you are about a certain value or the probability of something being true, or the accuracy of a purported thing that will happen in the future, an event, or just it could be quite complex. I mean, I'm not sure how much you usually deep dive in these interviews, but the history of probability involves a lot of other concepts like likelihood and so on. And it's very hard for humans to handle these. I mean, the mathematics, we know that some people like math, others don't. Some people read papers only the formulae, and other people just read everything except the formulae. That's not so strange. But we saw, for instance, when Kahneman got the Nobel Prize, he had done most of his work with Tversky, who had unfortunately died when they handed out the prize. So it was given to other people. But Tversky, Kahneman, they showed that we don't juggle these things very well. So my work with multimodality is often trying to take the human out of the loop, out of the decision making until the very last minute when questions of responsibility come in. Then the human must sort of shoulder the responsibility that goes with acting in the way that the algorithm or the mathematics proposes. So that was probably your longest answer to the first question.
No, absolutely. And we love deep dives on this podcast,
Okay.
so it's brilliant. And on that concept of how, as you mentioned, Danny Kahneman has researched on, and many others, we are quite poor at understanding probabilities and also statistics in most cases. And especially in the health sector at the moment, there are many judgments that are passed through based on human analysis on statistics.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a potential area that we could have a quite direct implementation of AI?
I certainly think that anyone interested in implementing AI for healthcare would have to talk to biostatisticians and also, of course, other groups. But biostatistics is crucial in the sense that it used to be so-called Fisher type statistics, and most people think of p-values, propensity scores, statistical significance, and certain things they learned at school with long names, like Spearman, correlation coefficient, and things like that. But something happened that made people talk of like a post-Fisher statistics paradigm. And this something was that I found, and many other people found, that there's a lot of information in data that you can use regardless, sometimes under good conditions, regardless of quite poor statistical properties. And there are other things you can measure. And let me take a concrete example. Like, if you don't know what the data point, historical data point a few years ago for one patient pertains to, what does it mean? What is the quality of it, and so on? You might render it as useless because it could be just some poorly registered observation of something. The patient looked tired. The doctor jots down a note. And what we see now is that looking tired could be an important property if it is grouped or clustered or collected together with other people looking tired that shared also other properties. So we can argue statistically based on similarities and probabilities and so on. And we can do that very efficiently if we have a lot of data. And by a lot of data, I don't mean big data. I just mean if we have at least thousands of observations of people looking tired, we can start to use that. And one famous statistician, Bryman, he wrote this paper about two cultures in statistics. It's more than 20 years ago now, but he said that in the future we'll see at least two streams of statistics, one being the Fisher type, as always, because it has its place, and the second one being data-driven. So we can think of something like data-driven life sciences, data-driven biostatistics, and in the future maybe even data-driven decisions taken about patients. And these decisions could be quite well anchored in the data, but according to the old rules, they would be not useful or barely useful, or perhaps useful with caution. And now we tend to run with them. And when it was at its worst, maybe 10 years ago, Chris Anderson, who was at least at the time the editor of Wired, he said that I don't want to quote him because I think he was deadly wrong too, but he was basically saying that quantity can replace quality, and you had memes like data is the new oil and things like that. And what we have actually found is that quantity can never replace quality. You need, like I said, a lot of data, but the data should also be good quality, especially if the decision making is about important things. And when you talk about health, almost everything is important to the person we're talking about. And the people that love this person, they all care deeply, even if it is not a life-threatening condition or a serious chronic disease or something like that, but just something that affects the daily quality of life for ourselves or someone we care very much about is always important. So this means that for health, methodology must be important. And since artificial intelligence is often about making a guess, an inductive leap into some unknown territory, and then quickly verifying if that leap was justified or not, then we have to make sure that the algorithm doesn't just leap around randomly or leap around too much, but that the the guesses it makes should be, if not perfect, but at least okay from the beginning, and then we can sort of zoom in on the exact value, or to get over the threshold we need to get over for so-called clinical use, or some other threshold, maybe a threshold that regulators say, if you use any AI algorithm, it has to be quantitatively measured as accurate up to a certain percent of the cases. So in the proportion of 95%, it should be dead right. So that's where we are right now. I'm very thankful to Breiman for pointing this out in this paper, and unfortunately he died before it came true, but he was absolutely right. So if you talk about prediction, he was very good at it, and he also invented random forest, which is an algorithm or method that we use a lot today in AI. So
it's quite a beautiful algorithm as well. So
it is, and the idea is quite simple, and people can understand it also from a non-technical point of view, because it ensembles things, and it's about votes, and it's about trees, and about things that everyone can understand. It's easier to picture it if you think of the trees as upside down as compared to nature, but other than that, it's quite natural, I'd say.
To the many predictors who didn't see the result of their works, salute maybe. But if we go to the models and the foundational models, as you mentioned, the precision in especially the health sector is quite important. And I wonder if there are any, well, not to necessarily just pinpoint like a specific model, but generally, do you see particular models being better adapted for use case being used in the health sector?
Yeah, that's I think, very good question, and it has quite a simple answer. The answer is no, and it's not just about me thinking that the answer is no. I think we're kind of sure that this so-called free lunch theorem holds, which means that if random forest, for instance, is good for 98% of all health decisions, or for modeling certain situations in 98% of the cases, it can never be the best one in 100% of the cases. And you can easily show this, as was shown by all these statisticians for Fisher-type statistics in the 1950s. I think it was Milner that showed that, all these statisticians that tend to have funny names like good, fine, savage, they all came up with these decision rules and heuristic rules and said, use this and you'll be fine, in your field of expertise or in your domain. And then Milner just made a matrix giving us an example where, actually he gave us like 5 examples, and he showed that there was no method that could outperform the others in more than 2 of these 5. So that was the no free lunch thing. And it still holds, and still I see loads of papers that come out all over the world saying that I'm now going to introduce you, a radiologist, to machine learning, and I'm going to tell you that the best method to use is random forest, because it's been shown to outperform the other methods almost always. And then there's some sort of table or matrix or a prisma with a little literature study and so on. But the honest truth is that in all the cases I've seen, in all of those papers, what they compare to each other is actually incommensurable. And let me explain what that word means, because it doesn't mean what people think or tend to think that it means. Do you know what it means?
I dare not give an answer, so best...
I thought you were a brave man. No, but anyway, it means that they have no common measure. So you cannot compare 2 things if they don't have a common measure. Then they are incommensurable. So in popular tongue, it would be like comparing apples to pears, right? And you can do a lot of things. You can weigh them, you can look at the color, you can smell them, you can taste them, and so on. But apples and pears, they have some other differences that just makes it not useful to do a table of the tastiest apples and then have pears in there, or vice versa. And this is what is being done. So what is instead true, what I would like to see replace this thinking, is to look at the actual problem that you are trying to model, for instance, do a prediction model for, then look at the data available, and then on a case-based level argue for which method is best to apply here and which sort of learning should we have. And things come in like, how much in a rush are you? So are you thinking about, is this a one-time prediction problem, or is this a machine that will be called upon every now and then? And is this a learning machine that will be more and more useful to you, not just from 1 second to the next, but from 1 year to the next? Will it be used by your children? Because we have algorithms like that was used by my father and when he was programming. And they're still there. They're still true. There are truths about compilers and such in computer science that there's never been a need to change our view on certain results. Like I mentioned the no free lunch theorem, but there are many other theorems that we do well if we keep them at the back of our mind and don't forget about them. And of course, people like to be read and to be cited and so on, so they want to create these tables and matrices, and they want to compare apples to pears, but what they are doing is that they are actually duping the reader into thinking that the world is a lot easier to digest and understand than it actually is. And in the long term, that does damage. It does damage to science, and it does damage to the people interested in using these algorithms for their applications. And in health, as I said, the application is about predicting, classifying, organizing things, and all these things are important. So we should be very careful. So this is sort of a grumpy old man thing maybe, but from my ivory tower, it looks like someone has not been doing their education of statistics and computer science in the right way. They have told their students that this is how the world works. And of course, I'm not innocent. I've been telling people, don't use LSTMs. They are too much of a black box. They will always give you a headache. But then in the next sentence, I said, if you still want to try it, of course, it could be a good learning experience. I just want to warn you that many of my other students had problems with this particular class of models and so on. So I'm not innocent. I'm also overgeneralizing when I teach. But yeah, there's a lot of carelessness now that I think. And you could ask me this if I would give you a second to pose a question. So I'll
No,
do
I'm
it
just
for you.
enjoying. Yeah.
No, but you can think about what sort of teaching, what sort of education is good for artificial intelligence, and to a large extent, it's about the craft, and it's about. This is also like a mean to get your hands dirty with the data, we say. Just means to drill down into your data and understand its quality, like how many missing values are there, the errors and anomalies. Are they all errors, or are there genuine anomalies, maybe worthy of attention? And this craft, I find, is best learned by being in a room full of people that are good at it. So I'm trying to create these spaces, and I've been doing this for a long time. Ever since I had people I was a manager for, I wanted to create these spaces where there was a critical mass, where I could learn from looking over the shoulder of some person sitting at a keyboard just typing away, and he or she would be so swift, and it would look so easy, and everything was so fast, and they would know all the short commands, and they would know exactly what other code to invoke and to trust. And whenever you ask them a question, they look back at you with an irritated face. You're interrupting me. It's like they're in the zone somehow, and you want to get into that zone, right? So cathedral education in programming is a challenge.
But I think there are so many interesting topics to raise there. But one thing that I think, as you mentioned, you get influenced by the people around you at the current moment in the current zeitgeist is happening is the generative models. And as you mentioned, these models can influence human lives, and even many might say that on a relatively high percentage of the time they might be right, but even those short percentages can be quite deep wounds to people's lives and families. What are your thoughts about generative models being used? And also, I think you mentioned that there is sometimes these hypes between students, so there is definitely a bit of a hype in generative models.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked that up, because if me or somebody else creates this space, this magical space where people can learn from each other how to program, and also learn the biostatistics and the math, and deep understanding of deep learning methods and everything, and to sort of tune into this scientific ideal of the Vienna Circle people like Carnap and Popper, and these people that told us how to set up experiments so the results are reproducible by somebody else, and so on. And large language models or foundation models and the generative side of them is still very young, not perhaps as an idea, but the fact that they are ubiquitous, that you can have them in your search engine, that you can replace how you used to search for things on the internet with this thing, or that the search software you used, say DuckDuckGo or something, can be augmented by a foundation model, that is changing the way people think about facts. And I think it's unfortunate to talk about hallucinations, which many people do now. They say that these generative models hallucinate. It's more that they have a knob of creativity, you might say. So in this inductive leap that they continue to make over and over again, when they guess what you would like to see, if you say to them, generate a Jane Austen level with the happy ending, but without the unbearable tension that goes into the last 10% of all of her books. Well, maybe not the last 10%, but from percentage 89 to 99 of her pages, there is always this intense unhappiness, and then in most of her novels, it's sort of everything goes away in the last percentage, and they kiss, and then they'll be happy forever after. But it will then write a very poor novel without exception, and not just comparing it to Jane Austen, but comparing it to what a romantic novel or a I don't want to say that Jane Austen wrote typical romantic novels, because she wrote books that had so many other qualities, but you know what I mean. It's like the tension between the lovers and their families and what is expected and the norms and everything. Every time the foundation model gets something wrong that is laughable. But if you turn the knob to 0%, it becomes a deductive machine, a deductive algorithm. And the only thing it can do is basically same as when we do mathematical proofs. It can take syntactic snippets out of Jane Austen novels or similar novels and piece them together into a new masterpiece, in quotes. And we won't like that either, because then there won't be a single sentence that is, improvised in a bad way. But it's going to be just a rehash, and there will be no continuity between these snippets. And what people have found out, for instance, the New York Times has found out that they were often quoted, except that the foundation model forgot conveniently to say that it was cut from the New York Times. But one or two of their journalists would find entire paragraphs of text that had been reused and taken out of its context then. And remember that a foundation model is all about context. They are so-called contextualized models. They take every, if not every token, but every significant chunk of text should be placed in the right context. And sometimes they forget, I guess that was a case of animism to say that a foundation model can forget something, but I mean forget. In natural language processing, we have a different definition of the term forgetting. It doesn't mean the same as when a human forgets. But for instance, forgetting in a model that knows only English and then it learns Danish and forgets how to construct certain English sentences. That is what we mean by the model forgetting. It's not like it tries to remember something and fails. So I just want to clarify that. But anyway, in the situation where the foundation model is then improvising just right, couldn't we just turn the knob to what is right for us? So you set it to 7%, I set it to 4%. No, we can't do that either, because we want to be able to adjust this percentage from, not from minute to minute maybe, but from hour to hour, depending on what we want to prompt this model with. So if we ask it about mundane things, like what it thinks about the weather prognosis for tomorrow in Spain, because we're going to Spain tomorrow, then that's one thing. But if we want to condense an abstract to a long application text that we want to send in to apply for funding for a cancer project, then the accuracy requirement is very different. Then we want to set it close to zero. And since this technology is so new, people have not learned how to work with this knob. So we will be given dashboards and desktops and overviews where there will be such a knob, and we will be very bad at using it for a couple of years. And why I say this is in part because most people I know that use internet search, they don't know how to write a search query. So they swear about getting bad results, but they never use logical expressions like and or. They don't use cite : meaning you should only look at this web hierarchy. They don't put things in quotes in the right way. They don't know how to deal with numbers. So, how long have we had these search engines? Well, since about 1994. And that's 30 years ago, and we still don't master that kind of search. So thinking that we would master prompting of foundational models in less than 30 years, which is like 10 times harder, is optimistic. So that puts it at 2048, we will, people in general will know how to use these. What do you think?
Well, my focus is mostly with large language models, but just to mention 2048 is one of the years of the Blade Runner sequel, I think, as well. So maybe a bit of a scary number, 2001. But I think that RAG models these days have perhaps the best potential for at least giving both some factuality that they get from the retrieval side, and also the generative side, as you mentioned, the temperature of having it cool or heated, and by that we mean basically how creative the model, in air quotation creative, becomes there is some potentials to play with the knob to get some interesting input onto the information that it retrieves. And that's my question to you. Do you think that RAG models could potentially be like a better solution to these?
Yeah, I have lived through some important breakthroughs in how people use an appropriate new technique. So, for instance, relational databases. I remember what the database world was before relational databases, and that really changed things. And before I was born, Alan Turing invented the subroutine of a program. So the idea of having a main and then calling other pieces of code that could be like modules, that was pretty significant. We still use that, and I could give you 10 of these examples, but for none of those 10 examples there would be this immense industry pressure that is driving the development now. So once industry, and by industry I don't mean one industry like process industry or financial industry or health industry, but all industries at the same time, pretty much 2019, 2020, they realized that they could use foundation models, except that they didn't call them foundation models then. They were talking about transformers and attention mechanisms and so on. And what has happened now is that they're saying we want to use foundation models to make money. And not only to make money, of course, we want to create better products, better services, everyone will be happier, and we will make more money in the style of the pharmaceutical industry. It's not bad for us if there's an efficient treatment, but they will make tons of money. And if this new formulation of a new tablet for whatever is in part developed by a foundation model, then you need a different setup than just me looking at GPT 3.5, prompting it using the cloud, or me using some medical foundation model supplied to me by one of the large big tech companies, and me trusting them with my data not leaking, or I have a setting where I can say you cannot learn about me. And RAGs and all the latest development in the last 6 months or so with companies that have developed this sort of middleware between foundation models as they were generally conceived by researchers and the way that the employees in these companies normally use software, I think is a very good thing. It will help all of us to get a better interface. What is very special though about the health industry and also researchers in health is that when we use care data, they can be very sensitive data. And when we use, for instance, genetic information, it doesn't have to be a lot of data points for us to very quickly identify exactly who we are talking about. And we never do that, of course, but a third party listening in or buying this data could use that as a feature. And this means that most of our solutions have to be on-premise solutions. So if I talk to one company about, yes, we have procured from you a service where you give us access to a lot of foundation model functionality without me having to have huge CPU and GPU resources locally. So you've done all the pre-training and you basically run the model for me and I have the interface, then I just cannot use that, because what I need to do in a health setting is I need to have the infrastructure for me to copy their model, take it offline, index my data on the same offline machine, prompt this copy having been indexed with my data. So it's a form of what we used to call desktop search. I don't know if you remember, but there used to be company called Google that had a product called desktop search, and it let you Google, in quotes, your own machine. And I loved that. I used it all the time. And I think they discontinued that maybe, is it 15 years ago now or 12 years ago or something? I mean, didn't work for them for whatever reason commercially. So they just took it away. And up came startups and said, for all you people that love this, we're going to provide it for you, so you can still run desktop search on your machine. But of course, these companies were not Google. They did not have the resources or the data access. So none of those startups could provide a very good service. So I tried a couple of those and they didn't work for me. And I just gave up. And now, in the year 2024, I can do it. I'm back. I know where to find stuff on my own computer or my own area on a server or something that I access remotely, you know, a computer in Great Britain that has some sensitive data on it that I can access from here. I can now search every single data point because I can take that data and index it on my copy. And I wish I could use cloud. I wish the big tech companies could say, Magnus, you can use this for as sensitive data as you like, but because here is a guarantee, we signed in blood here that if you paste something in about a particular patient, it's not going to be echoed when Avid asks, you know, he puts in a prompt and he gets back your patient's data, you know, because of the temperature setting or because of something else. If they can guarantee that, then wow, I can do so much research so fast. I can have like literally like not quite the Library of Alexandria, but almost. I can have so much facts at my disposal. So then I think I cannot blame my computer setup then if I'm a bad scientist. I have to look at myself. It has to be me that's sort of faltering because I will be very happy. So I'm in this situation now pretty much. So I'm doing this, but it doesn't scale yet for many reasons.
I think it goes back to some degree, at least, to the Jan LeCun argument that we have to have more open source models that people can just run locally on their own computers.
Yeah. I mean, he's been right about so many things, and he was certainly right about that. I think that for artificial intelligence, open source is fantastic. I mean, I use, for instance, now for automatic segmentation of certain organs in the body from a certain modality, a certain imaging modality. I use a lot of open source code to segment, to contour something inside the body. And then radiologists can use that information. And they can do that work manually. And they are fantastic, of course. They are rock stars. I mean, when they do the work, it looks like, you know, my oldest son, when he was playing World of Warcraft at its best, it's amazing to see them, but still the algorithm outperforms them. And that's thanks to so many people having contributed to the open source code. At the same time, something that I have been arguing that people don't like to talk about is if I come up with a super efficient, let's say, segmentation algorithm, so I automatically can isolate interesting things in the body. So it could be an organ, but it could also be pathologies, it could be air that shouldn't be there, or it could be a bleeding that shouldn't be there, that sort of thing. Then I make it all open source, including my training data and everything. Then, of course, other people will create services based on this, and they might charge for that, and I can have a license that regulates that. I mean, apart from Jan LeCun, there are people like Lawrence Lessig and in the history of computer science, I'm sure you know most of these people, at least their thoughts very well, that you have to be a bit careful with how you set up your licensing and so on. But in this case, imagine that you have a radiologist that just realizes that, okay, a particular hospital has outsourced assessments on scans, and I work for a company, and the company is paying me per scan. And the hospital would do this internally if they had the staff. But radiologists are too few in number. They have more and more things to do in their working hours. And they have high salaries. So outsourcing, sort of from a market perspective at least, it sort of makes sense, right? So this person finds out that there's this algorithm. So Magnus Boman and his colleagues, they put up something here on GitHub, and they have a neat interface, and they also have this scientific publication. This all looks legit. I'm going to try this. And then the radiologist realizes that, ooh, I can save. It takes me 16 minutes to do every assessment, but it takes me 4 minutes now if I use this software. So what do they do? Do they do science? Do they do research? Do they publish reports? Do they call me up and thank me or something? No, they just do their job, and then all of a sudden they have 75% of the time freed up. So what can they do? Well, one thing they can do is they can take on 3 more jobs and have 4 salaries. That might be a good idea, but it might also be a very bad idea. So what they can do is they can spend more time in the forest or with their children or walk the dog or whatever. That could also be a good idea or a bad idea. But the thing is that they don't have any, my point is that they don't have any economic or other duty to report exactly how they're doing their work. If the hospital is not happy with their assessments, then of course somebody might look into this and say, hey, I see your quality has gone down, what's happening? Or someone might look at their metadata and say, hey, you did all these assessments so fast. I mean, are you using some kind of software? And with AI software now, we say, for a journal, for instance, a journal might say, they might ask the author a question like, did you use any generative AI for your work, and how, and can you please detail that? So it becomes part of our scientific reporting. But if we talk about the commercial world, those duties are just not there, typically. So this means that I use somebody else's free code, I produce more code, I give back by giving my code also to the world to use for free, and then someone uses this as an arbitrage, and they are not paying back. So they basically put the money in their own pocket. So they are at the end of a sequence of dominoes where they pocket. And if this was a great football player that's being sold to some famous team for tons of money, ridiculous and quite sick sums of money these days, then these dominoes are traced back, and even the player's first club gets some money usually, and the second club and the third club and whatever. But in this case, that's not how these licenses are set up. And if I remember correctly, the Free Software Foundation and these people that started to worry about licensing and intellectual property already in the 60s and definitely in the 70s. And then people like Lawrence Lessig came up with part solutions for this. They warned about this. They said that in the future, information wants to be free, code should be free, someone should be able to start a company based on free software. That's all cool. But there will be parasites in this system. And what we need to do is we need to identify these parasites. And I don't want to be the guy that says, yeah, Magnus did a podcast, and he called radiologists parasites, because radiologists are, as I said, they are rock stars. I adore them. They are fantastic. So we're talking here about certain individuals that exploit something that can be exploited. And unfortunately, that's a human property right. If there is an arbitrage, someone for sure will try to exploit it to make money.
Yeah.
What was that, 7 minutes?
No, no, I just remember the question that a musician once asked me at a debate, that couldn't we start charging these companies that use our data to train their models? And I just had a very hard time explaining to that musician that it's very hard to like understand if a company has used your specific song or not, because when it's into the model, it's just weights at a certain point. So it's definitely something to think about how the licensing of it should work out, so that the people that make these models that are extremely costly also have some benefits from it. I hope, happily, of course, Meta is not in any financial troubles on that front, but
No, but they did have to pay a lot for, like, this Facebook button that you can press to give me all the data you got about me. That cost them quite a lot of money, actually, to implement that. And I tested it. It works. I got back a lot of gigabytes of information about me, and I'm using the product under a different name, so it's like they got a persona or something that but it's still me on most of those pictures and so on. So I've actually spent a lot of my time in the music world, so it's funny you should mention that. So I'm using one of my music producer names. So what is the persona of me is like this music producer or artist or whatever, choreographer, all these roles that I've had using that name. But still...
would you like to do a reveal of
No,
your persona?
no. People that are really interested can figure it out. But I mean, Maximilian Schrems, this young lawyer, he was so successful in making companies like Meta spend so much money on actually keeping the users happy, that I think that he is the kind of guy that the Free Software Foundation people were dreaming about, that there will be young bright people coming up, and they won't take shit. They will say, okay, I see the world, I see how my digital traces are being exploited, I don't like it, I'm going to sue someone and I'm going to win. And then he does that and he wins. It's like David Goliath sort of thing, no one is expecting him to win, and all of a sudden the European Union is doing AI acts and stuff, saying, yeah, we have to worry about Schrems and Schrems 2 and now it's Schrems 3. I'm just eating popcorn. I love this. What I'm not so happy with is that I cannot use the cloud for my health data, as I explained before. So I have to do workarounds, and these workarounds are not democratized. I can do them because I'm in a super privileged position in a very privileged country full of super privileged citizens that can many of them can have jobs or get into a position where they can do the same thing. And I've never been interested in publishing papers for my own rights, but I know that if I wanted to, I could generate high quality or respectably published scientific papers now, basically running this machine, just pushing the button. Here's more data, here are more findings, then new data come in, more findings, and so on. And I haven't seen this development yet, but it will happen for sure. And it's the same thing there, that we need safeguards. We need people inside science that act a bit like Maximilian Schrems does for social media users. We had Aaron Swartz, but he died, and there were other young bright people that tried to stand up for the individual's rights in the digital world. So I just hope they will keep on coming. And some of them are that are out there. They are called hackers or pirates or so on. But most of the time, to people like me, they are heroes, because they are sort of, they push the boundaries of these exploits and say, I did these things, and I didn't do it for money. I did it to show that essentially this system is broken. And right now, these parasites are using the fact that it's broken. So they are siphoning off your resources, and this is how they do it. And I just want to give them a medal most of the time. But, the law and the regulation and people's norms have always created a certain tension between people that like to produce code with people that just want to use code and don't care about how it works. Luckily for me, most doctors are medical doctors. I mean, they're really interested in also opening up the boxes. And at the same time, they're not afraid of black boxes, because they've used them throughout their training. They don't necessarily know how a mass spectrometry machine works, or a cyclotron, or something else that they were using as part of their training. So for them to say, well, here's a deep learning filter for a scanner, do they have to know exactly how it uses, mathematical concepts like Fourier transforms? No, they don't. They can just decide if they trust the machine. If they do, they can use it. If their colleagues are just using the machines without questioning it, most likely they can do the same without risks to the patients. So that's the domain that I chose. And I haven't done it all my life, but most of my working life I've been in health. But I have also spent time with robotics, physical robots, and for entertainment purposes, I should perhaps add, and in the financial industry with trading agents and so on. So I've seen AI being used in very different ways in financial industry, process industry, and so on. And to me, I just belong in health. So foundation models, when I think about them, and the recent developments that you mentioned, I think that most of the middleware and most of the stuff that help people to do prompting, so instead of hackathons, you have promptathons now, right? Maybe you've seen this, that people get together and try to figure out how to prompt the model. That's going to be of use, for instance, to the financial industries more than health. But I guess that's okay. I guess they are so useful for us too that it's okay if other industries just have more use of them.
Perhaps health is like the last industry to take on the things when they've been well tested out in other places.
Yeah, that's been said many times, so that there is this lag. Yeah, exactly. I heard that many times. What I have found in Sweden, at least, and in the few other countries where I've worked, is that it's a very heterogeneous situation where that's true in almost all the cases. But then you have these exceptions where someone, for instance, at Karolinska Instituted, we have people that built their own hardware infrastructure to use for their big data pipelines, because there was just no other way for them to efficiently procure or otherwise obtain the software and hardware that they needed to process their data like they wanted to process it. And I'm amazed that they just took the time to figure out how this all works, and then they did it, and now it works, and they can do good science. So you have those people, and then you have people that say, yeah, this new thing that's supposedly good, foundation models, what can it do for me? Here's my data. Can you do some magic with my data so I become convinced that I can try it out? So that's the whole spectrum, right, from one end to the other.
As they say, necessity is the father of invention.
It used to be mother, actually.
Is it the mother? Yeah, and there was this recently in the news that the scientists that were using these very sophisticated MRI machines have used them to transcribe some of the scrolls from Herculaneum in Vesuvius. So there's always some interesting things that are going in the healthcare sector that can just later on be used. But going to the data, I wonder, because as you mentioned, quality is one of the key issues that you have to take in, and also the ethical concerns regarding patient information. What are the measures that you're taking in to try to gather the best data possible, and also perhaps trying to take into consideration the patient rights and individual rights?
Yeah, so if we leave the ethics aside for just a few minutes, so with one of my students, I invented a method where you can first do unsupervised machine learning to cluster things, and then in that step you become informed about what features or variables you should focus on in a later step, which is a supervised step, more traditional machine learning, where there is a gold standard maybe or ground truth that you can just look up. And in these prediction models that we get fed with in media and so on, there's often this masking trick where if you have text, you have certain words that you put tape over, and then you ask the algorithm or the machine or the model to predict what's under the tape. And of course it's a very cheap way to train a machine, because all you have to do is lift the tape and then you have the ground truth there. And in the medical world, if you think about what is a gold standard or ground truth for solid tumors in cancer, well, it used to be that the physician would feel the tumor using the hands, and that was a standard because all the physicians had hands, and the oncologists could meet up and they could learn from each other how to feel a solid tumor. Now we of course there are non-solid tumors, but there are also today the ability to see these tumors very much earlier than they can be felt. So what becomes the standard then might be a point cloud on some scan, where, for instance, a radiologist or an oncologist could look at the scan and say, well, this will turn into something that I can feel. But when I can feel it, maybe it's too late for me to do anything about it when it comes to curative care. So what we tried to do is we tried to come up with ways to combine method so that low quality data, for instance data full of missing values, instead of throwing that away or instead of imputing a lot, which history has said that we should do, if there are holes or anomalies, we replace them with spline values, for instance the average between the point before and the point after, and then we just put everything on the curve and everything will be fine, and we use our regression and so on. We really don't want to do that today, because we know that it's better to use these low quality data maybe for like a clustering step, like I mentioned in the example when we started talking, like this person looks tired. That's not a 7 on some risk score or something. It's almost like an impulse for the physician that he or she felt that this might be important. She says she's okay, but she looks very tired. Now then it starts to get interesting. There starts to be some sort of story behind this. And what foundation models can do, for me and for physicians, clinicians of all kinds, is that they can create trajectories. And it doesn't have to be over time. It could be some other dimension or event-based, but where a patient starts out some treatment after a diagnosis and then switches the treatment and switches something else, dose maybe of some medicine that they're taking. Some unwanted interaction is found between two things that they're swallowing every day, so one is replaced by something else. And you look at this and they are beautiful colored graphs of various kinds. And we have fantastic computer science methods today to deal with such graphs. So that's what we're trying to do. And then, not forgetting about the ethics, I would say that if there are ethical problems with the data, then that data becomes immediately very low quality data and should not be used. So it falls under the threshold of quality, because if it's not ethical to use the data, then it's like, to me, the data does not exist. And what I mean by this is that throughout medical history, we've seen that we can get measurements and data points in various ways, but through the history of the internet, we know that we can also collect people's traces, digital traces, without them even knowing. And of course, the first method might put people in pain or in jeopardy, or they might feel helpless in very bad ways. So that's very, very bad practice. The second one, you might say, well, they don't even know about this, so how can it be unethical? Well, it still can be unethical, because we have an obligation, without Maximilian Schrems or Lawrence Lessig or Jan LeCun or anyone like that telling us, we have an obligation to inform whomever we want to help with what data are we using to help you. So for instance, here in Sweden, we draw blood from all 3 days old babies, and it's been proven to be fantastically useful for metabolic diseases and for many other things, much more than was originally conceived. And there's so much you can do today with blood. So what you do with that blood is very different between countries. And if you compare Norway to Sweden, it's not the same thing. So if you have a baby in Norway or Sweden, how the blood is used from your 3-day-old baby is going to differ. Now, is there a problem in there? No, but there is. The difference means that someone with insights into ethics should look into. I would say a philosopher is a good person to look into. Is there a risk, for instance, that parents in one country go to the other country to have their baby there? Because that might have huge social implications. Like we've seen these where in countries where abortion is illegal, some people, they go to other countries and they have the abortion anyway. And what does that do to those societies and to the people involved? So whenever you look at the ethical side of things, you cannot look only at the data. You have to look at, again, these dominoes and all the way to the end. And I've been asked to sit on many ethical committees because I know AI. And I've even been a philosophy teacher for a while, but I am not qualified, because it's better to have a philosopher that does not know everything about the underlying technology than to have someone like me that knows a little bit about the philosophy and ethics, and I've read my Spinoza and so on, and all the technology. But you really need someone that is good about thinking about all these domino effects. And that's not me, and that's not a single clinician or a single politician. We have to put our trust to the people that will not likely be replaced by AI soon, namely our philosophers.
That's a line from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think. That's philosophers won't be replaced by
Oh, I didn't remember that. Okay.
The question a bit more about how much data to gather from a single person. And there are even companies these days that give you likely scenarios of what health issues might be the ones that take you down, basically, and lead to your death in the US.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on, as you mentioned, we are at a position nowadays that we have the capability of both eating our cake and having it. So we, just by drawing blood, can take out so much information about one single person, about from their DNA and their heritage and all of this. Do you have any ideas about how much data we do want to have?
Yeah, I mean, for dried blood clots, I think we haven't even spent 1.5 of those for the first babies that we have blood for, and if a researcher does not use it all, it's deposited into the biobank, and someone else can go to the biobank and take it from there, and so on. So it's a wealth of information. So whenever a company, let's say an insurance company or something, say that, yeah, we'd just like to take some tests, what they talk about then is the sampling from you. So it could be from your body, it could be your tissue if you're unlucky, but it could be a piece of a nail or some hair or something, and they can use it for all sorts of things. But I actually think the other dimension is more fascinating, and that's what we can do. You mentioned genomics, for instance. Now there are so many other omics, and the microscopy, for instance, is developed so that we now talk about molecular medicine, we talk about single cell, lots of things to do with the fact that we can get closer to, well, eventually to the Planck length. So we just zoom in. So rather than saying we need more data, so we need to sample more people, or we need to ask more people how they really feel and so on, we have at the other end the methods for analysis. So I think those two dimensions should always be considered together, and I personally am fascinated by evaluation, validation, calibration, all these things about how we measure impact and the usefulness of our models and so on. And that makes me happy in healthcare because it's not there in the financial industry. So this, and in parts of academia, in the social sciences, it's too much for me. It's too much evaluation and calibration. They don't do enough work sometimes. They just get stuck with the methodology. So I find in health, it's because we have usually a pressing nature time-wise. You have this patient is in treatment now, and we need to fix this within 3 weeks. We can't sit down and scratch our heads for a month, because then it'll be too late. So I like that those harsh time constraints that are usually there, because it forces us to make more decisions. That's what I like, to make decisions.
Well, in hope of the humans still being able to make those decisions, I think it's would be a good point to conclude this conversation. I would like to thank you very much for doing it. We would have definitely had the chance to talk about many other stuff as well, but it was truly fascinating. So thank you very much, Magnus Boman, for joining me today.
Thank you. I couldn't have hoped for better questions. I think your questions were very insightful and to the point, which made me just talk, I guess, and not wait for the next question. So because I didn't need to sweep them away. So best of luck with your work.
Thank you.